Good evening and welcome back to our long-awaited French tutorial series with legendary former Latimer head Peter Winter. It's really great to see lots of familiar faces on the screens and also to welcome those new to the event. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And I don't know about you, but I've really missed these virtually speaking Zoom sessions. And I've certainly never been as well versed in French high culture as when we enjoyed Peter's lockdown literary tutorials on Molière, Flaubert and Baudelaire. I think my cultural capital may have plummeted somewhat since then. But thankfully tonight Peter's back in the hot seat, this time discussing the conniving exploits of people in power, the backstabbing, the narcissism, the egos. I am, of course, referring to the 17th century and Jean Racine's tragedy Britannicus. But before we start, a quick reminder on how the evening will look. The session, for those that know, falls roughly into three parts. First, Peter will give us some context around the playwright and his work. Then he'll explore in more detail the language from just a couple of the play's key scenes. And in the final section of the tutorial, we'll open the floor to discussion. We'll share our ideas and observations, and Peter will answer any questions you have. If you'd rather not ask questions yourself, although most of you are not shy, type your question into the chat facility and I will read it out on your behalf. And please do keep your microphones on mute until we start the discussion, so that we can all hear Peter clearly. Finally, I wanted to thank Peter and you, the audience, for supporting this evening's talk. This is the last session in the first series of French literary tutorials, which has now raised a staggering nearly £4,500 in donations, all of which will go to our annual bursaries appeal. So on behalf of the foundation and the school, thank you all so much for helping us in our Inspiring Minds campaign. You are helping to give bright children without financial means a fantastic start in life, which is of course a Latimer education. So Peter, we are all thrilled to be back in class. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Well, thank you. Listen carefully, everyone. It's lovely to be here, and I have a long association with Racine and Britannicus. I was not taught this, I was taught a Racine play at A-level myself, brilliantly taught actually at school, rather indifferently taught at Oxford, but I did Racine as a special paper, and I think I inflicted Britannicus, which was a play I didn't know very well at the time, on my first A-level class. One or two survivors are in the audience tonight. There are a couple of private jokes which I'm going to share with you, really, and I'm going to let the two participants speak for themselves. So if we could cue in Jamie, first of all, please, just to tell a little story about Racine and Britannicus.
Did we rehearse this? Which one? The one about Odette de Morgue, or the one about making it up?
We haven't rehearsed it, but it's something about you blagging your way into Oxford University, Jamie, I think.
Yeah. I was asked in my interview about Britannicus, or about Racine, and I either made up that I'd read Britannicus, or I think you had given me a quote from that woman Odette de Morgue. Was that it?
Yeah.
And so I named Odette de Morgue. And they were blown away because the rest of my interview was, I was my usual, half-wit self. And they said, where did you hear about here? And I said, well, my teacher, Peter Winters, told me. And but it was enough to get me in. So you're the reason I got into it.
She wrote a book called The Triumph of Relevance. She was a don at Girton College, Cambridge. And I must have mentioned it to you. Maybe we even looked at it, Jamie, who knows? But anyway, well done, and you went on to great things as a result. Thank you for that little contribution. And if I can now ask my second, my own daughter, Tiff, who in true daughterly fashion failed to follow my instructions about her own Oxford entrance.
Yeah, exactly. So, I'd like to say it's the only time I didn't take my dad's advice, but maybe not true. But yes, this was back when I was applying to Oxford and doing the application, and I remember writing in the cover note, I wanted to put in something impressive, and Dad said, well, if you make sure, read Britannicus, and then, when you go to your interview, they'll be really impressed. So I decided to follow part of that. I put it in the cover note, but I didn't read Britannicus, which Dad had said, don't put anything in that note that you're not going to have read. And I was like, yeah, sure. So the night before, I remember I was practicing with my dad, and luckily got a quick synopsis of Britannicus, because sure enough, as soon as my interview began, the first question was around how impressed they were that I'd read such a challenging text at a young age. And I was thinking, oh dear. And I was trying to rack my brain, because obviously they were like, what, tell us a little bit about what you liked, what resonated with you, da, da, da. And I couldn't even actually remember Nero's name. And luckily they put it down to nerves. They're like, oh, don't worry, we know this is quite a nerve-wracking experience. But anyway, it did work. I got in, so thank you, Dad. But I will,
I'm not sure that's a slightly, thank you, Tim, it's a slightly double-edged sword, that story, isn't it?
Yes.
Don't follow my advice. Well, there we are. Anyway, that I think gives you a sense that we're about to explore some high culture, as Sean said. Britannicus is a play written by Jean Racine. If we could have, this is where I lose my notes, but Lynn, could you put the picture of Jean Racine, John Root, if you translate that, and there is the lie. Can you get my screen? My slight pause here. Aha, perfect. Yes, John Root doesn't sound quite as good as Jean Racine, does it? And that's one of the problems with Racine, because he's pretty much untranslatable, though I'll do my best tonight to give you a sense of it. There he is in all his finery, mid-17th century, a bit of a superstar in that time, a favorite of Louis XIV. He was orphaned at 4, sent off to be educated by the Jansenists, who were rather doom-laden, gloomy Catholic sect that were obsessed with original sin, human depravity, necessity of divine grace and predestination, perfect credentials for becoming a tragic playwright. They were very alarmed when he started getting interested in the theatre, and I suspect more interested in some of the actresses that were in the theatre at the time. So they sent him deep south of France to get him away from it. But he returned, and the lure of the theatre was too much, and he publicly broke with his former tutors. He was labelled by his former teacher a public poisoner, not of the bodies, but of the souls of the faithful, because Racine dared to write about passion. His first great play was Entrebât in 67, Britannicus 1669, known as La Pièce des Connaisseurs, made a great success at court. It's a political tragedy. And a few years later, he wrote Phèdre, another famous play, 1677, and he really went for it this time. This is a play about incest, and he got so much hassle, opposition, that he actually withdrew from the theatre for 10 years, became the royal historiographer, recording the king's military campaigns, and then just wrote 2 more plays latterly, both biblical stories. And he was deeply repentant, so rumour has it. Can we go to slide 2, please? Lynn, slide 2. Hello? It's not there. Slide 2 is the list of the actors, please. Oops, I lost it again. Yes. So let me start with I want to get into the play as quickly as possible, not to give you too much theory. But this partly explains why Racine is a difficult take for British people. It's very unlike, it's alien really to British culture. Just looking at the cast list, there aren't many people on stage. You just compare it, say, with Shakespeare. In fact, even the title of the play is a misnomer, because Britannicus he's not a very interesting character, really. He's a rather naive young man. Historically, and he was poisoned by Nero when he was 13 years old, but I think in this play we're invited to believe he's 15, and Nero is about 17. So we're dealing with adolescent boys here, rather like the sixth formers I remember teaching at Lateran in the 70s. Scary stuff. Nero is the emperor, but he shouldn't be emperor. He's the son of Agrippine and her first husband. Her second husband was Claudius, who is the father of Britannicus, and Britannicus is the rightful heir to the throne. But Agrippine, the second wife of Claudius, essentially murdered her husband and engineered Nero onto the throne. That's the nub of this play. There's a tension between Nero and Britannicus, the usurper and the rightful heir. Junie is an invented character. She actually existed in history, but was not betrothed to Britannicus. Amante, by the way, does not mean his lover. It's not that salacious, this play. It simply means that they are betrothed. They're expected to marry. Burrus and Narcisse are tutors. Burrus is a military man, straight as a die. Nero's tutor, who wants to believe the best of him. And Narcisse is Britannicus' tutor, but is a double agent. It's a bit like a Iago figure, and he's playing a double game and is really on Nero's side. Albine is really a cipher. She's just there to prevent Agrippine talking in monologue. She's a part of her retinue, and you get a couple of random guards. Let's go to the very first scene. The play, Racine plays begin at a moment of crisis, very simply, 5-act plays, classical or neoclassical, because they're based on classical themes. Racine would have known Euripides and Sophocles off by heart. He could write lyric poetry in Latin. So, and some of his audience would have been the same. So classical literature gave him a backdrop, a list of characters, and he can pick amongst them, but he actually is, although he imitates, he doesn't limit himself to that. He invents and changes to heighten tensions and to create particular situations. The play respects the unities. It's all about constraint. Another famous quotation about classicism is le classicisme est l'art de la limitation, the art of limitation. And in Racine's case, these constraints were very happily embraced. The play takes place during one day, the unity of time. The play begins right in early morning, before daylight, in fact. In one place, we're in Nero's palace, outside, in a kind of a random room where people can come and go, just outside Nero's palace. And there will be no subplots. All of the action focuses on the main story. There's not even an interval. Racine plays are played right through, 5 acts, 2.5 hours, and the tension screws up as you go along. So Act 1 is moment of crisis, and Act 1 explains what that crisis is, so it's called the exposition. Acts 2, 3, and 4 are working out the intrigue, the plot, and the twists and the turns, what the French call the péripéties, the peripeteia, the ups and the downs, the surprising turnarounds in the plot. Is he not going to? Will he, won't he? And then Act 5 is literally the unknotting, the dénouement of the play, where the knotted threads of the play are unraveled, and we always, in Racine, we head for complete catastrophe and chaos. So Albine, the play begins with an exclamation, quoi? What? Why is she surprised? She's surprised because Agrippine, her boss, this very, very powerful woman, is wandering around, pacing anxiously up and down outside Nero's apartments. Tandis que Néron s'abandonne au sommeil, it's a nice way of saying while he's asleep. Why are you here? Why are you wandering around without your retinue? La mère de César, the French love, and Racine loves periphrasis. That means Agrippine, Caesar's mother. Caesar is the emperor, remember? Nero's mother is performing a vigil alone at his door. Madame, go back to your apartment. Agrippine says, Albine, il ne faut pas s'éloigner, I've got to stay here. Contre Britannicus, Néron s'est déclaré, and that's the trigger for the play. Nero has declared against Britannicus. L'impatient Néron. that adjective in front of Nero, emphasize impatient Nero. He's no longer accepting any constraints. Up to now, we are to learn Agrippine has had him in the palm of her hand. She's been really running the state by proxy. Nero's her proxy. And he's beginning to flex his muscles. And that's what this play is about. They're huge, like two rutting stags. Son trying to break free from mother, mother trying to keep control of son. And that third line there, last de se faire aimer, he's tired of being loved. The first 3 years of his reign, Nero was popular. Il veut se faire craindre, he wants now to be feared. Britannicus le gêne. In modern French, gêner means embarrasses him, but in Old French here, it means torments him. Gêne is actually linked to the rack where they used to pull people apart. Britannicus it torments him, Albine, chaque jour, and every day, I feel that I'm becoming importunate in turn. Next slide, please. So that sets the scene. Now, let's look a little bit at Racine's language. He's writing in 12-syllable lines, the classic Alexandrine line. You can count them. Je le craindrai bientôt, 6. Classic caesura in the middle of the line. S'il ne me craignait plus. 6-6, classic balance. And that first line, these are just little illustrations of Racine's art, his language, the exquisite language which he uses. I would fear him soon if he no longer feared me. The conciseness of the expression, the same verb is being used, different person, different tense. The second example is an example of chiasmus, posh word for balance. Look at the way he constructs his line. Je vois. I see my honors grow. Je vois mes honneurs croître. Because Nero continues to flatter, et tomber mon crédit, but my credit falls. That's kind of A, B, B, A. Mes honneurs, the noun, followed by the verb, and then verb followed by the noun. Beautiful line. And one of my favorite couplets. Now, depuis ce coup fatal, since this fatal move, this is what Nero has done overnight, which is why Agrippine's pacing up on it, is he's abducted Britannicus's fiancée, basically. He's had her forcibly brought to his palace. Since this coup fatal, le pouvoir d'Agrippine, these characters speak in the third person, my power, and then this line is magnificent. Vers, listen to the sound, vers sa chute, à grands pas, chaque jour s'achemine. The alliteration, sa, pas, chaque, achemine, a repetition of those sounds, and then the alliteration of the ch sound, vers sa chute, à grands pas, chaque jour s'achemine. The richness of the language. And in the 1660s, the French language in the 16th century was chaotic, and there were strenuous efforts at the end of the 16th century and early to regularize the language and to make it fit to be a literary language. A lot of writers in the 16th century, Frenchmen, wrote in Latin. French was the vernacular. And so by the 1660s, there was a taste for refinement. It was a run, a feminist movement in the salons. They would meet, Racine would go along to these, as Molière did, I mentioned this, talking about the misanthrope, and he would read the next act of his play and people would comment on it. And Racine is seen as, I think, probably the high point of classical French language. Next slide, please. So I'm jumping to Act 2 here. Acts 2 and Act 4 are where I'm going to focus. In the rest of Act 1, we find out that Boris is an honest man who still thinks Nero's a good guy. We find out that Britannicus is hopelessly naive and ingenuous. He thinks Narcisse is on his side, and he says to him, well, I don't understand it. Nero seems to know everything I plan. And Narcisse, oh, dear me, that's terrible. And rather heavy irony. Anyway, moving on into the beginning of Act 2, we meet Nero for the first time. And here he is with Narcisse, who's this double player, the Iago figure, against his own master, Britannicus. And this is a dramatic moment. Why has Nero suddenly gone ape? He's gone rogue. He's abducted this young woman. Narcisse, en effet, Néron est amoureux. I am in love. Vous, Chocras, what? Depuis un moment, mais pour toute ma vie, forever. The young passion. And then another lovely line. J'aime, que dis-je aimer? J'idolâtre Junie. I love, what? I don't mean love. I idolize Junie. Next slide. And then he explains the circumstances of the events of the night. He basically, in Racine, love and hate are very close to each other. Indifference does not exist. And the real love in this play is between Junie and Britannicus. There's a touching relationship. Nero's love vacillates wildly towards hatred and jealousy if he's thwarted, which he is. And so here, excité here means aroused, really, as a kind of sexual undertone there, but aroused by a curious desire. Said to me last night, je l'ai vu arriver en Seigneur. His guards have dragged her to his apartment. Triste, this is Junie, she's sad. Levant au ciel, ses yeux mouillés, moistened with tears, looking up at the sky. Qui brillait, he's attracted by her tears. Her eyes were shining in the light of the torches, the flambeaux and the weapons. And again, the next couplet, a beautiful description of a woman wearing a nightie, basically. Belle, sans ornement, she's got no decorations, no makeup or jewelry. Dans le simple appareil, in the simple apparel d'une beauté, of a beauty qu'on vient d'arracher au sommeil, who's been wrenched from her slumbers. And then the next line is telling, j'aimais, I loved jusqu'à ses pleurs, jusqu'à, even as far, I even loved her tears, which I was making flow. He rather relishes his power over this defenseless young woman. It's worth saying that Junie is a descendant of Augustus, the great emperor. She comes from a very distinguished family. Her brother was murdered by Agrippine, we find out later. She and Britannicus in this play are the victims, the two powerful people, Nero and Agrippine. And the last two lines, quelquefois, mais trop tard, he's referring to sometimes, but too late, je lui demandais, I begged her pardon, I asked for her forgiveness for treating her so roughly. J'employais les soupirs, I sighed, et même la menace, and then I threatened, and that shows the juxtaposition of these two things. Next slide, please. So Narcisse is bemused. He said, well, you know, what's the problem? You're the boss. Just tell people, commandez qu'on vous aime, you will be loved. Nero here is racked with doubts, and this goes right through the play until the denouement. Which way is Nero going to go? Is he going to remain the good guy? Is this just a little lapse? Or is he going to become the monster? History, I think, and our knowledge of history tells us which way this is going to go. It's going to end badly, isn't it? And he's worried about all the chagrin that he will feel later on. But as Narcisse says, but qui vous arrête? It's not who's stopping, or who, but what's stopping you, Lord? Tout, Néron says. Octavie, by the way, Nero is married, that's his wife. Agrippine, his mother. Boris, his tutor. Sénèque is another tutor, doesn't appear in the play. Rome entière, the whole of Rome. Et 3 ans de vertu, the first 3 years of his reign. He's been a good guy, and he's going to have to try and break the mold. Next slide, please. And so here, this is in the same scene. Nero is revealing himself. Act 2 is all about us discovering Nero's character. And here he's explaining to Narcisse that basically he's terrified of his mother. Éloigné de ses yeux, when I'm away from her, j'ordonne, je menace, I give orders, I threaten people, I listen to your advice, Narcisse. I even dare approve your advice. Je m'excite contre elle, I get roused against her, and I try to confront her, la braver, take her on. Mais, je t'expose ici mon âme toute nue, I'm laying bare my soul to you here, as soon as for my misfortune, she comes into view. I'm going to jump a few lines here. Basically, he's terrified. And the very last line there, mon génie here, it means his mind. Étonné means thunderstruck. Tremble devant le ciel, trembles in front of her. He just can't stand up to her. Next slide, please. Now, in comes Junie. In Racine plays, in classical French plays, when a character exits or entrances, that starts a new scene. So Junie has arrived, and there's a sort of polite exchange at the beginning, and she does let slip in this that Britannicus loves her. And of course, this is a red rag to a bull, because Nero is jealous of his half-brother. I won't go through the whole of that because time will be too short, but the fatal error that Junie makes here is that the last three lines, il m'aime, he does love me, he shows me affection, and in so doing, he's obeying the emperor, his father, Claudius, who wanted them to get married. And if I may say so, he's obeying you and your mother. Vos désirs, your desires, are always so much like hers. That's like pouring oil onto a fire. What? You think I'm my mother's lickspittle, do you? Ma mère a ses desseins, madame. My mother has her plans, madame, et j'ai les miens. And I have mine. He reacts very forcefully. Next slide, please. So he's still with Junie, and he goes into full-on threatening mode. He basically says that I'm going to bring Britannicus in to see you, and her heart leaps. Oh, great, fine, thank you. But he has a very unpleasant stratagem in mind. And let me translate this line. Si ses jours vous sont chers, if his life, his days are dear to you, send him away from you without him having any reason to believe me jealous. Caché près de ses yeux. And so what's happened? And this is almost the realm of tragicomedy rather than tragedy. Nero is going to hide behind the arras rail, something like that. You know, he's going to hide and witness the scene. Caché près de ses yeux, hidden near here, I will be watching you, madame. Renfermez votre amour, close up your heart in the bottom of your soul. Vous n'aurez point pour moi de langage secret. You won't be able to speak any secret language to him. J'entendrai des regards, a nice conceit. I will hear your looks that you will believe to be mute. In other words, if she looks plaintively at Britannicus, he will see. Et sa perte and his destruction, his doom, his loss literally, will be the infallible salary of a gesture or a sigh, soupir échappé pour lui plaire, which might slip out to please him. Je vous laisse. I'm leaving you. Sa fortune dépend de vous plus que de moi. His life depends on you now more than me. Madame, en le voyant, when you see him, madame, songez que je vous vois. Remember, I shall be watching you. Okay. So we leap forward here a little bit. I've cut that scene out, but basically the Britannicus comes in and is overjoyed to see Junie. He doesn't realize, of course, that Nero is hiding. There's that irony, dramatic irony, which was the whole scene. And Junie says, "Look, oh, walls have ears, I can't say anything." And Britannicus doesn't understand and takes it rather personally and feels that she doesn't love him, sensitive, young, adolescent soul that he is. But it is clear from watching this scene, Nero realizes how much he actually does love him, although she tries to play a very straight bat. When Britannicus goes off in despair because he's not been given satisfaction by Junie, Junie asks Nero to leave she needs to go and weep quietly on her own. And here Nero is bitterly, at the end of Act 2, speaking to Narcisse, saying, well, eh bien, de leur amour, tu vois, you can see how violent their love is. Narcisse, elle a paru. Elle here, bizarrely, amour in 17th century French is feminine, would you believe? In modern French, it's masculine. I'm not quite sure why. Elle means love. Her love appeared even in her silence. Elle aime mon rival, je ne puis qu'en ignore it. Mais je mettrai ma joie à le désespérer, but it will be my joy to make him despair. This is where he's the kind of pantomime villain. Je me fais de sa peine. I imagine his pain charmingly. I make of it a charming image. And I've just seen him doubt his beloved's heart. And so he's enjoyed seeing Britannicus frustrated and heartbroken because Julie hasn't responded warmly to him. Off he goes, and Narcisse says, well, fortune has called me for a second time. Narcisse, will you resist its voice? Let's go right to the end. Et pour nous rendre heureux, and nous means me, and to make me happy, let us destroy these wretches. He means Britannicus and Julie. So with friends like Narcisse, who needs enemies? Can you put the next slide up, please? Now, you can see this is Act 4, so let me briefly say that in Act 3, the tension is twisted up. There are a number of things that happen in Act 3. For example, we find out that Bruce still wants to believe that Nero is the good guy, still. We come across Britannicus, who's desperate, talking to Narcisse. Narcisse makes him even more jealous by saying that Julie might actually rather like Nero, a complete lie, of course. And so the tension is built up, and we don't know which way it's going to go. We keep going one way or the other. Agrippine is outraged because Nero has banned one of her advisors and counselors, and so she's looking for a confrontation. And the whole play really gears up towards this massive clash between Agrippine, the mother, and her son, and it takes place at the beginning of Act 4. And here it is at the beginning of this scene. This is magnificent, this scene, one of the great scenes in French literature, in my view. Agrippine is in full, I'm in command mode. Approchez-vous, Nero. Come over here, Nero, and sit down. This is mum talking to a recalcitrant adolescent son. On veut sur vos soupçons que je vous satisfasse. Lovely imperfect subjunctive. I gather you want to be satisfied as to your suspicions. J'ignore de quel crime on a pu mener. I don't know what crime I've been blackened with. De tout ce que j'ai fait, all those I've committed, I'm going to enlighten you. So she's admitting, she is, we're about to find out, she has been absolutely appalling. And so she then basically says, in the rest of this little bit here, that she managed to wheedle her way into Claudius's affections, because Claudius's first wife, I can't remember now what happened to her, but she was condemned, she was condemned in some way. And Agrippine gets in front of the pack to become his second wife. There was lots of opposition. You could see that line, parmi tant de beauté, among so many beauties who were trying to attract his attentions. And then the next line after, je souhaitais son lit, I wanted his bed, meaning I wanted to be his wife, concubine. Dans la seule pensée, with the sole thought de vous laisser au trône, of putting you on the throne where I would be placed as his wife. C'était beaucoup pour moi. And she, this is magnificent rhetoric. She is presenting her argument, the case for the defense, if you like. This was a lot for me to do. Ce n'était rien pour vous, but for you, nothing. Ce n'était rien encore. And off she goes. These are very long speeches. Can we have the next? These long speeches are called periods, and they were opportunities to display the rhetorical devices that these academic intellectuals were taught. So Agrippine carries on. Cependant, Claudius se penchait vers son déclin. He was getting an old man, ses yeux longtemps fermés. He was blind, metaphorically. He didn't see what I was getting up to. S'ouvrir la vie. He suddenly realized, they opened finally. He suddenly realized what was going. Il connut son erreur. He realized his mistake. Occupé de sa crainte, il laissa pour son fils échapper quelques plaintes. He realized he shouldn't have disinherited his own son, Britannicus. Et voulu, mais trop tard, and wanted, but too late, to get his friends together, ses gardes, his guards, son palais, his palace, his bed, son lit, m'étaient soumis. They were subject to me. I was the boss. Je lui laissai sans fruit consumer sa tendresse. That's an ambiguous line. I allowed him to consume his love without fruit. I think it means she denied him sexual favors, so they didn't have a child, which would have muddied the waters inheritance-wise. De ces derniers soupirs, je me rendis maîtresse. I was the mistress of his final sigh, just as he was dying. Mes soins, my cares, my attentions, en apparence, apparently épargnant ses douleurs, apparently sparing his pain, de son fils en mourant lui cachant. She denies him the right to see his own son as he's dying. Il mourut. And we infer from this that she poisoned him. She murdered Claudius, the emperor, so that she could put her son on the throne. Next slide, please. We carry on. So she's done her, she's laid out her argument, her confessions. I've done, basically what she's saying, I've done so much for you, you owe me big time. C'est le sincère aveu que je voulais vous faire. This is the sincere confession that I wanted to make to you. Voilà tous mes forfaits. They're all the crimes I've committed. En voici le salaire. And this is how you repay me. Du fruit de tant de soins, peine jouissant, enjoying the fruits of all of my cares. You only just started enjoying them. En avez-vous 6 mois par reconnaissant? You were only grateful for about 6 months. Que lassé d'un respect. And so you were tired by being respectful towards me, which no doubt tormented you. Vous avez affecté de ne me plus connaître. You've more or less ignored me since then. Next slide, please. Nero listens patiently, chafing at the bit as she goes on. She berates him and scolds him. And eventually he speaks wonderfully ironic language. Je me souviens toujours que je vous dois l'empire. I still remember I owe you the empire. Et sans vous fatiguer, without tiring yourself, telling me all about it. Votre bonté, madame, avec tranquillité, pouvait se reposer sur ma fidélité. You could have allowed me, you could have been quite calm in allowing me to remain faithful to you. Aussi bien ces soupçons, ces plaintes assidues, your suspicions, these assiduous complaints, ont fait croire à tous ceux qui les ont entendus, have made everyone remember who's heard them, que jadis, that formerly, the last line, vous n'aviez sous mon nom travaillé que pour vous. You basically have only done this for your own benefit. Next. And Nero says, Rome wants a master, not a mistress. It's a recurrent theme in the play. It's a masculine world here, and Agrippine is something of an outlier. Rome veut un maître. And also, he says, Britannicus, the last 3 lines, contre moi réuni, you have strengthened Britannicus by offering him Julia's hand. Next one. So here he's counterfiring, and Agrippine basically losing. Vous êtes un ingrat, an ungrateful wretch. Vous le fûtes toujours, you always were. Dès vos plus jeunes ans, mes soins, mes tendresses, even when you were young, you only feigned love for me. And then the plaintive question at the end, T'ai-je fait quelques vœux qui ne fussent pour toi? Have I ever done anything that wasn't for you? Keep going, next slide, please. So Nero appears to be swayed by her arguments. Says, okay, what do you want then? And Agrippine, thinking she's won the argument, goes into, again, command mode and gives a whole load of orders. De mes accusateurs qu'on punisse l'audace. Punish the boldness of those who accuse me. Que de Britannicus en calme le courroux. Le courroux is something for wrath, anger. Let's calm Britannicus down. Que Junie à son choix puisse prendre un époux. Let Junie choose her husband. And so it goes on. And then the last request is to make sure that Burrus doesn't stop me coming to see you. And Nero, again, feigns complicity, he feigns acceptance. And the last line there, all right, avec Britannicus, je me réconcilie. Next slide. This is all Act 4. Burrus comes in, hearing that Nero's sort of apparently changed and says, I'm so pleased, Burrus. Burrus is a bit of the straight guy. And Nero said, but elle se hâte trop, Burrus, de triomphe. She's triumphing too quickly. J'embrasse mon rival. I'm embracing my rival. Mais c'est pour l'étouffer, it's to suffocate. Quoi, Seigneur? What? The scales fall from Burrus's eyes. C'en est trop, il faut que sa ruine ne délivre jamais des fureurs. Britannicus' downfall must deliver me forever from Agrippine's madness. As long as he lives, I'm only half alive. And Nero basically says, avant la fin du jour, before the end of the day, I will no longer fear him. He's going to kill him. So this is an example of the twist, the ups and downs, the péripéties. You think it's going to go one way and suddenly it slams in reverse and goes the other way. Next slide. In comes Narcisse and says, okay, Lord, I've sorted out some good poison for you. He's obeying Nero's orders. He's just tried it on a slave and it worked charm. So he says, faites périr le frère, kill the brother, that's Britannicus, and abandonnez la sœur, and dump Julie, and you'll be fine. And then this is the very end of Act 4, and Nero hesitates again. He can't quite bring himself to go through with it. And so the Act 4 is, we're left hanging in suspense. Viens Narcisse, come Narcisse, allons voir ce que nous devons. Let's go and see what we have to do. Act 5, the denouement. How is this all going to be unraveled? It starts with Britannicus, elated. He thinks he's with Junie. They can express their love together. And he's just off to see Nero to drink a celebration cup. And Junie is worried, can we trust him? She, of course, is right. And Britannicus leaves her the last two lines. Adieu, je vais le cœur tout plein de mon amour. My heart is bursting with love. Au milieu des transports emotions, in the middle of the emotions of blind youth. And there's many true word there, aveugle jeunesse. He is aveugle, and part of the irony is that we sense that he's going to his doom. And then things accelerate. So you imagine a boulder rolling down a hill, it's going to crash at the end. So Agrippine, just after this, says, Il suffit, j'ai parlé, tout a changé. I've won, I've spoken, everything has changed. Mes soins à vos soupçons ne laissent point de you. There's no need for any care. She's talking to Junie. You can rely on me. My son, il s'est penché en fils. He was behaving as a son who freely comes to the bosom of his mother to forget his own haughty pride. And at that moment, just at the moment, as Agrippine is triumphing, crash, bang, screams off stage. Remember, this is all the physical action happens off stage. All the intensity, the violence is in the language. And Junie says, Au ciel, heaven, save Britannicus. And Burrus comes running in. Agrippine says, what's happening? Madame, last line, son effet, Britannicus expire. He's dying. So again, a very sudden turnaround. And then this all has to be explained, and that's the rest of the play. Bruce now is the messenger, as in a classical play. If you're familiar with that, a character witness to the events comes on and narrates. And it's open to question whether or not that's almost as dramatic as seeing it on stage. So here, scarcely the emperor seen, his brother come, his half-brother here, Britannicus, he stands up, he's narrating in the present tense, you can see here, for greater drama. Il se lève, il embrasse, on se tait, there's a silence. Et soudain, César, Nero, prend le premier, une coupe à la main, takes the cup, and then he makes a little speech, let's drink to bless our reunion. And then, next slide, Britannicus swears the same oath. La coupe dans ses mains par Narcisse est remplie Narcisse fills the goblet in Britannicus's hands. This isn't going to go well, is it? Mais ses lèvres, à peine en ont touché les bords, his lips have barely touched the edge of the goblet. Le fer ne produit point de si puissants efforts. A sword cannot kill you more powerfully. Madame la lumière, ses yeux est ravi, light is snatched from his eyes. Il tombe sur son lit, ou present tense, he falls onto the ground, sans chaleur, cold, et sans vie, and lifeless. Next slide. And then Bruce, the camera, as it were, pans round to Nero, who's on his couch, watching this. Cependant, sur son lit, il demeure penché, he's laying on his couch. D'aucun étonnement, he doesn't seem at all surprised. Ce mal dont vous craignez, dit-il la violence. He's talking here, he's suggesting this is an epileptic attack, which is known as petit mal, I think, isn't it? This illness, whose violence you fear, a souvent sans péril attaqué, during his youth, often overcame him. Narcisse veut enfin affecter quelqu'un. Narcisse tries to feign upset, et sa perfide joie, his perfidious joy, bursts through despite him. Bruce is now seeing the reality which he's denied for so long. And then next. And so in comes Nero, and Agrippine accosts him. Arrêtez Nero, stop Nero. J'ai deux mots à vous dire. Always means she's going to say more than two words to him. I have a word to say to you. Britannicus est mort et je reconnais les coups. I recognize. Je connais l'assassin. I know who did it. Et qui, madame? Disingenuously, Nero. Vous. Moi? Voilà les soupçons. You could be capable of such suspicions. Il n'est point de malheur. Donc is there no evil, which I'm not capable, guilty, I'm sorry, guilty in your eyes? Et si l'on va, madame, écouter vos discours, and if, madame, one were to listen to you, ma main de Claude même aura tranché les jours. This is a real thrust between the third and fourth rib. Listening to you, anyone would think that I was the one who killed Claudius, when, of course, it was Agrippine. Fantastic retort. And you get the impression that Nero here is gaining confidence. There's real bravado. He's taking her on. This is an eyeball to eyeball confrontation. Let's see. Very rapidly moving this. And you'll see here that Agrippine no longer uses the vous form. Poursuis, tu forme. Avec de tels ministres, par des faits glorieux, tu devas signer. Ministers with servants, Narcisse, like him, you will distinguish yourself by glorious deeds. Poursuis, carry on. She's using the tu form because the gloves are off. She's no longer, there's no veneer of respect. There are two ways of reading it. It's either mother talking to a little boy, or she's insulting him. Tu n'as pas fait ce pas pour que you haven't taken this step to step back again, to recoil now. Ta main a commencé par le sang de ton frère. Your hand has begun with the blood of your brother. Je prévois, I anticipate that your blows viendront, will come to your mother. In other words, I know one day you'll kill me. Mais je veux que ma mort te soit même utile. And she curses him rather frighteningly. I want my death to be of no use to you. Ne crois pas qu'en mourant, je te laisse tranquille. Don't believe that when I die, I will leave you quietly. Rome, ce ciel, ce jour, quand tu receives Rome, everything here which you got from me, partout, everywhere, every moment, m'offriront devant toi. You will be, your conscience will be pricked by this. Tes remords, your remorse will follow you comme autant de furies, like furies. Tu croiras les calmer par d'autres barbaries. You'll think your slaughter will go more and more. You'll create even more slaughter, try and to lay the bogey. Et ton nom paraîtra dans la race future. And this, of course, is a nod to history. And your name will appear in future history amongst the cruelest of tyrants. And then this dismissive, adieu, tu peux sortir, you may leave. And the next. And then Albine comes running in to tell us the final event. She's the second messenger, two messengers here. And again, the physical business is, I mean, Britannicus just died off stage, but there's more that happened. Madame, Seigneur, courez vers l'empereur, run to the emperor. He's gone mad. He has been separated from Junie for life. And Agrippine has Junie committed suicide. Albie says, pour to strike César with an eternal regret. Madame, sans mourir, without dying, elle est morte pour lui. A nice conceit. Without dying, she is dead for him. And basically what happens is that she has run away to the Vestal Virgin. So she's denied Nero what he wants. He will not have her in every sense of that term. Caesar, Nero, watches them leave and doesn't try, watches her leave without trying to intervene. But Narcisse, plus hardy, bolder, s'empresse pour lui perdre, tries to ingratiate himself again with Nero. Il vole vers Julie, says, oh, in the present tense, so it's immediate, it's happening in front of us. He flies towards Junie, and with great bravado, d'une profane main, with his profane hands, he begins to stop her, grabs her, and the mob tear him apart. De mille coups mortels, 1,000 fatal blows. Son audace, his boldness is punished. He's ripped apart, lynched. Son infidèle sang, his faithless blood, spurts all over Julie. Ghastly image. And then finally, Albine says, she's narrating Nero's behavior. Il rentre, he's coming back. Chacun fit son silence. Everyone is terrified of his fierce silence. All he could say is the name Junie. He's been denied her. Le seul nom de Junie échappe de sa bouche. Il marche sans dessein. He's walking aimlessly without a plan. Ses yeux mal assurés, his furtive eyes, nose levés au ciel, regards égards. He doesn't even know where to look. And Agrippine wonders whether perhaps this blow will change Nero. We know it's a vain hope. Mais Bruce, allons voir jusqu'où vont-ils. Let's go and see how far this man will go. Voyons quel changement produiront-ils. Will his remorse change him? S'il voudra désormais suivre d'autres maximes, will he change his behavior? Will he follow other maxims? And the play ends with a rather vain exhortation. Prie to Dieu, would to the gods that this might be the last of his crimes. And that's it. I haven't left a lot of time, but I hope for those of you who are still there, there may be one or two questions. We can talk more about the theory if you're interested in that, and the kind of rules, the constraints which Racine operated in, whatever you like. I'm going to salute you all while I get my breath back.
Thank you, Peter. That was such a privilege to hear you bring those words to life and give them meaning. Well, certainly for me, that was fantastic. Thank you. So have we got any? Theo and Annabelle. Yeah, you've written Julie Spencer, but I don't think that's a question.
No, sorry, that was a reply to a message we got asked to identify yourselves.
Oh, I see. Sorry. I thought there's some that I don't know who that is. So anyone else? Has anyone got any question? Oh, Jamie.
Peter, that was great. It took me back, although I still can't remember if we actually did Britannicus or not.
Not sadly, nor can I.
40 years ago. How much license, if any, did he take with the actual story? Because I seem to remember seeing a film or a version of it where Junie dies sort of on top of Britannicus. She drinks from the same cup.
Really? You're not thinking of Romeo and Juliet?
No, I'm not, and it might just be my memory. And I also think I saw Diana Rigg once as Agrippine in it. So yes. I'm mixing a whole bunch of stuff up. But
Jamie, I saw the same production. Yeah. Diana Rigg played Agrippine in the Almeida Theatre in 1999, and Toby Stevens was Nero. It was a double header. Followed Britannica. We followed Phèdre. So 5 hours of classical French tragedy in one go. There was an interval between the two plays, but not within the play. But the question of license, Racine took considerable license. He changed history. Basically, Greek. This is his first Roman play. His great love was Greek theatre and Euripides, but this play was based on the histories of Tacitus. And he is very happy to take characters which are familiar to his audience, but to invent a character, to invent a relationship, to work towards his central aim of concentration. And so that was allowed. It was, although imitation, but also he could use his imagination. And he talks about this in the prefaces. I've got some quotes later. There are a couple more slides later on, if anyone's still there, where he talks about this. Sometimes he was criticized for it, but then it was a rough and tumble place, 17th century French theatre. I mean, a couple of years after this, Corneille was the great old man of French theatre, and Racine was the young upstart. Actually had a head, they both chose the same play, Titus and Berenice, and they wrote a play on the same subject. And Corneille hired a bunch of guys to go and whistle during Racine's play. It wasn't as genteel as we might like to think, although the actual language is the ultimate in refinement, exquisite refinement. It's almost like grand opera.
Peter, sorry, Jamie. I was just going to read out Emilio's question. Unless, Emilio, would you like to ask it yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I had thrown my microphone. Yeah, do you rank, I mean, it's obviously it's different period, but do you rank Racine higher than Corneille, and if so, why?
I don't, but I mean, I think probably in the French canon, he is seen as the number one. Racine's canon was much smaller. He wrote 12 plays. One was not a great comedy called Les Plaideurs, a legal comedy, and 11 tragedies. Corneille wrote over 30 plays and had a much wider range. Corneille has gone out of fashion because he talks about honor and gloire, personal sense of honor. But his great plays like Le Cid and Horace are magnificent plays. And he also was more innovative in some ways than Racine. He wrote a fascinating play called L'Illusion Comique, which is very, very modern. It plays with the notion of theatre and illusion and reality. It was quite groundbreaking at the time. And he has a Gothic side. I haven't read the play, but I gather one of his early tragicomedy was used earlier in the century to mean tragedies, but with physical action on stage. So Le Cid is a tragicomedy because there's a famous slap, for example, which dishonors. But in one of his plays, apparently a man has his eye poked out with a hat pin. And you don't get that in Racine. So I think they're both very gifted in different ways. I don't know if I'm avoiding your question. I think most people would, however, would point to Racine as the kind of summum, but Corneille may come back into fashion.
Yeah, hi, it's Andy here. As a French scholar myself, my view has always been that Racine is the sort of perfect, the apotheosis of classical French literature. Yeah. So I'm a great fan of Racine more than Corneille, I have to say.
But there is some majestic language in Corneille, in some of his great plays, but we haven't talked about it. It'd be a very interesting conversation. I think this play, Britannicus, a political tragedy, is very contemporary. We have mentioned Vladimir Putin, Nero, but there are things going on in the world which this play resonates. For me, emotionally, it has huge truth. The way in which a bully, a man with power, can misuse it, can go from affection to threat, just like that. It's very real, I think. I mean, there's a lot of human nature there. And so I think Racine does speak to the human condition, and he's, without being pretentious, he's very contemporary, and you can relate it to all kinds of this play, I think, an episode, you can relate to all kinds of things that we're reading about in the newspapers at the moment.
Peter, on that point, I was going to ask whether Racine, when he wrote this, had any contemporary, at the time, political messages or statements to make, or was it, he was telling the story of a political classical tale, yes. But did he have anything contemporary in mind? Or was it seen as still more?
I mean, certainly I don't think he was trying to make any comparison between Nero and Louis XIV. That would have been suicide.
That would have been fatal, yes.
That wouldn't have been a good plan. And so the honest answer, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I think his subject is humanity and the passions, and how passions can be damaging. It's interesting, this play, his Roman play, if you look at his Greek plays, the gods loom large. In Andromaque and in Phaedrus, the gods destroy people. Where are the gods in this play? Are the gods here that which we don't understand, that which we don't understand about human nature, human beings not in control of themselves, or are they? Humanity is what he's writing about, I think, in general terms, and no doubt in the 17th century, people may well have drawn parallels, but I don't know what they would have been.
Well, certainly these are eternal themes of, desire, jealousy, love, passion, revenge, all these things, they still hold true.
And spite when you can't have what you want,
And the real power sitting with women.
Sorry, Jamie, didn't hear it.
And the real power sitting with women.
Yes, in this case, yes. Although Agrippine loses in the end, doesn't she? At the end of the play, she's looking into the abyss, really. The play begins with her power being threatened for the first time, and as the play unfolds, although she has one or two moments where she thinks she's reasserted her influence, it transpires that she's lost. She loses the battle. I mean, these two monsters. Racine referred to Nero as a monstre naissant, a nascent monster, a monster in the making. And we have to use our imaginations to what he went on to do. But he couldn't have done much worse than his mum did earlier on. I mean, she is happy to recite her litany of crimes. So you might say, it was Larkin, wasn't it, who said that parents mess you up. I don't quote him exactly. And you might, I think, a modern interpretation of this say that Nero is victim of poor parenting.
Peter, the point you're making about the should a monarch or a leader be only loved for fear, or feared for love, that sort of humanist dualism.
Yes.
I didn't get a sense of how long that internal debate was going on in Nero's mind. The way you told it, it sounded like it was, well, I could be this, was that for 3 years, and now I'm going to be this. what sort of depth was that explored in? You know, in Shakespeare, it would have, you know, it was taken up a couple of acts. Yes. But in Racine, how long did it take?
Well, it's a theme that runs right through the play from beginning to end. I mean, as I say, the play starts at this moment of crisis. For the first time, Nero has shown what turned out to be his true colours, and then through his hesitations and the power of his mother, his fear of his mother, he's held in check until the end of the play. So it's a transitional moment. And Nero is like Caligula. Caligula was a good emperor for the early part of his reign, then became a terrible monster. And of course, the opposite case, Augustus, who was unbelievably cruel, but then is more remembered for great acts of clemency at the end of his reign. So he had a different trajectory. So I suppose the dynamic of the play throughout is who's going to win, Agrippine, or is this mother-son tussle? And one of the things which chafes with Nero is that, you know, and remember his age, he's 17, you know, he's been under his mother's thumb, or he's acquiesced in his mother's authority, but he's now wanting to be his own man, his own boss, and he bolsters his thinking by saying, Rome veut un maître et non une maîtresse. It's a masculine world, a patriarchal society, you know, Rome wants a master. In that respect, I think that's probably quite like Russia as well.
And how does Racine handle women in his plays generally? Because I mean, Shakespeare, you know, the whole thing about a woman in a patriarchal society, you know, where the power lies with the men, let's say, well, briefly, then they tend to be described as sort of, you know, scheming or disruptive or unnaturally ambitious and so on and so forth. What are Racine's women like usually?
They're strong. Yeah.
Yes.
Or I mean. Andromaque is a case in part. Andromaque, the play, is a play about, you know, A loves B, B loves C, C loves D, but they're all unreciprocated loves. And so you get endless jealousies. And Andromaque is the dignified widow of Hector, who's war booty with the Greeks, and Pyrrhus, who's captured her, is in love with her, but he's betrothed to Hermione, who is followed around by Orestes, who's, you know, we know that Orestes is always pursued by the Furies. He's half mad all the time. Orestes lusts after Hermione, she lusts after Pyrrhus, Pyrrhus lusts after Andromaque, and Andromaque is devoted to her dead husband. And so, I mean, the women hold their own. Of course, in Phèdre, Phèdre is the extraordinary character who is in the grip of, you know, divine retribution. She's in the grip of an incestuous passion. She is in love in a very physical, sexy, so with her stepson, Theseus's son Hippolytus, this handsome young man, this charioteer. And they're not. I mean, it's called incest. It's not incest in the closest sense of the term, but it was a forbidden passion. But these women are hugely powerful figures and complex, interesting people. There's no sense that they're second-class citizens. Yeah, I don't know if that...
Yeah, I these questions are coming from a point of complete ignorance, Peter. I've never read nor seen a Racine play.
I'm just a page ahead of you, James.
So Peter Rupert says that he's had to leave, but actually says, thank you for your masterful summary of the play. And it's all starting to come flooding back. So there we go, finally.
Did I make it clear about the, why is it that the physical action doesn't happen on stage? Because in this play, the play ends with two dead bodies. You've got Britannicus poisoned, Narcisse is torn to shreds by the mob, blood everywhere. Junie is dead for all intents and purposes. She's off to the nunnery. or the Vestals, and so Nero, Agrippine and Burrus all anticipate their own deaths. So you're left with Nero is overseeing chaos. And all of this is narrated. It's in the language, and the physical action happens off stage. That's part of this refinement. Earlier, 30 years earlier, there would have been physical action on stage, but there was a growing sense of, it's linked to préciosité, which was the female-led salon movement for refinement of behavior, refinement of manners, refinement of dress, refinement of language. The salon were interested in, the most exquisite and delicate pleasures, and didn't want to contemplate, if you like, the harsh realities of life. And so that's one of the attractions of the classical idiom, of course, that you can use, you can actually use the messenger to narrate these stories, but it's very powerful. Some of these, as in some Greek tragedy, the messenger coming on and narrating, is very powerful. The most dramatic Greek tragedy I ever saw was Medea. I don't know if any of you have seen that, by Euripides. And Racine thought Euripides was le plus tragique des poètes, who's his ultimate hero. But the ending of Medea is the most shocking thing I've ever seen on stage, where it's about jealousy and spite, and eventually Medea, the mother, to get at her husband, kills her 4 children. And that's the last scene. And depending how that's played, when I saw it at the Theatre Royal Bath years ago, it was utterly shocking, astonishing. And that was on stage. Now in Racine, that would be narrated, I guess.
It'll be very interesting to see how the Lyric Theatre in Hammersmith do this. I assume it will be in English rather than...
Yes, it's a new translation, I guess. I was reading about it today, Alvin.
Okay, well, we should go. We should go.
Well, I'd love to go, and I will if
Well,
I'm
we'll
here.
go.
But I'm hoping to be in France then. Partly
of
because
course,
of the long stay visa saga, which I won't bore you with.
Okay.
The entente not very cordiale is not helping.
My recollection of, I don't know whether anyone can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, is that Corneille struggled with the unities, whereas Racine managed to observe them fairly well.
Yes, and not only did he observe them well, they help his cause. He embraces them very willingly. So the play takes part in one day. It begins very early in the morning, and the action is over by the end of the day. There's no subplot, and all of this happens in one room. For Corneille, the unities were an unwelcome constraint, and he didn't always. Some of his early plays are called tragicomedies. Le Cid, his famous one, is a tragicomedy, because there's physical business on stage. Whereas in Racine, complete refinement, no physical business, violence, passion, but in the language. And in the most, Racine's vocabulary was extraordinary. 4,000 words-ish, Shakespeare, 20,000 words. So it's a very limited sort of jargon he writes in about love, les feux, the fires of passion, courroux, wrath. There's a kind of coded language he uses, which people could tune into and appreciate at the time. But it does mean that Racine historically hasn't traveled terribly well across the channel, because I think much of the joy of Racine is hearing the language, and which is beautiful.
To that point, Peter, actually, I was going to ask you, we all go and see Shakespeare all the time, here in New York or in London, in England, and I think around the world. In France, is Racine, is it a regular event? Is there always something on by Racine and Corneille somewhere?
Yeah, there's always something in Paris. Corneille less so, I'd say. But in Paris, there's always. Andromaque and Britannicus Andromaque is the most performed Racine play, and Britannicus and Phèdre probably after that. And there are 9 other tragedies he wrote, like Mithridate and Iphigenie, and Athalie, the final play, which is biblical inspiration, enjoys it. I have read it. It didn't blow my socks off, I suppose. I preferred the Blood and Thunder of Britannicus and Andromaque. They're magnificent plays. Now they're my 2 favourites. But yeah, no, Racine's always on somewhere in Paris. You always get a Racine play in Paris. It's part of the canon of the Comédie Française, but of course, that's the job of the Comédie Française is to defend or to illustrate the patrimoine, the cultural heritage of France.